My name is Annamaria Enenajor. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I'm also the executive director and founder of the Campaign for Cannabis Amnesty. The Campaign for Cannabis Amnesty was a campaign that was started in 2018. It was started by a group of lawyers like myself, as well as academics and social entrepreneurs who were interested in making a positive impact in the cannabis space, particularly as Canada was going towards legalization of cannabis. What we noticed was that there was no policy or legislation that was designed specifically to ameliorate all the harms that have been done by decades of cannabis prohibition, specifically the harms that have been visited upon Indigenous and Black Canadians through unequal prosecution of cannabis offences. We thought that was unfair, and we thought that something had to be done about that. It spawned out of legalization, particularly because we looked at the legislation that the government had crafted for legalization, and it looked like something that was very technical and designed to help the rich get richer. It wasn't a piece of legislation that had at its forefront the amelioration of the conditions of those who are poor and marginalized, those who are vulnerable, and those who had their lives essentially destroyed. So many layers to how we can approach the concept of cannabis amnesty broadly. So the first layer is we were advocating for expungement of criminal records. So we wanted the government to delete any criminal records relating to cannabis possession, which is something that, because of its legislation, is no longer illegal. So that was the lowest hanging fruit. We were saying to the government, we want you to remove the stain that is on the record of people who did something that is no longer illegal. That was the first layer. Then we went and we said, well, we want to actually ameliorate the position of those people who have been harmed from cannabis prohibition. So looking at things like, well, what are the obstacles that they face in society? One of them is jobs. So we were looking at how do we assist people to clear their names, get jobs, retrain, get a foothold in society if we are looking at people who have cannabis prohibition convictions in their background. Then we were also looking at other things, like how can we make the cannabis industry itself more equitable for those individuals. So looking at how much money is being made in it's called the green rush, like the green gold rush. Well, if you look at the composition of the C-suite of a lot of cannabis companies today, there's not a lot of diversity there. So how can we influence those companies to take seriously diversity and equity initiatives in order to use their power and their money to benefit the people who've been the most harmed by cannabis prohibition? Yeah, training programs, internal consultation, design and developing of programming internally in companies, as well as education programs. I think that is so key because a lot of people don't understand or recognize the history of cannabis prohibition in Canada. It's important for us to be able to communicate that to them. Another initiative that we're excited about is developing a pardon clinic to assist people that have previous cannabis convictions to get access to the pardon model that was developed by the government through Bill C-93. It's a bill that was passed just over a year ago, and it instituted expedited pardons that are free in terms of their fees, but not in terms of actually getting the stuff that you need to be able to apply for it. There's still a cost to that, but there's this free and expedited pardon model that's specifically for people with previous cannabis convictions on their records. And it's something that we advocated and lobbied for, and now we're looking to raise the capital to be able to develop clinics to help people actually apply for that. Because one thing that the government has realized over time is that from the inception, the passage of that bill, there have been under 300 people who applied for that. And that is an extraordinarily low number because the government itself estimated that up to 10,000 people were qualified for that. The fact that we have a system that is inaccessible, that is not being tapped into by the people who need it the most, tells us that there is a gap there, and there's something that needs to be done to bridge that gap. And that's something that we're working with industry partners to get the funding necessary in order to be able to launch those kinds of programs. We see them as two separate projects, but their mission is the same. The objective of going to corporate cannabis and asking them to invest or to reorient themselves is ultimately for the objective of helping the people who need it the most. It's sort of a way of redistributing capital in a voluntary way. So I'm not a consumer. I had never had much interest in cannabis, tried it a couple times, not for me. What really got me into doing this kind of work is the social justice side of it. As a criminal defense lawyer, I've seen people's lives being impacted by cannabis convictions by criminal convictions. I've seen people who have been able to change their life around still suffer because of the lingering effects of a conviction. And it's especially heartbreaking to me when it's something as innocuous as a cannabis conviction, especially simple possession. It's just fundamentally unfair. So I was driven by that sense of fairness to do something in this space. I was also driven by the fact that we have statistics on how cannabis was policed and enforced in our country, and that we know on the basis of those statistics that disproportionately the police were targeting Indigenous and Black Canadians. And that really upset me, as it would most people who care about fairness and equality. So it was really that reality that drove me to do something. I think that people can start off by educating themselves. It's really important that people understand how our criminal justice system works. There's a lot of misinformation out there about what happens to people when they are convicted of an offense. A lot of people think that the worst thing that can happen to you is to be sentenced. In fact, oftentimes, or in Canada, we don't give out high sentences like they do in the United States, but it's the impact that happens after you've served the sentence that has a lasting effect on your life. So a lot of people, after they've paid their debt to society, are still not able to get jobs, are not able to volunteer, not able to cross the border, and are left with the stigma of a criminal conviction. And that does more harm to society than it does good, because it prevents them from participating in society to their fullest extent, and it excludes them in a way that then drives them towards more criminality. So we have to understand how our criminal justice system works and not be persuaded by the rhetoric and the messaging about being tough on crime and the effects of being tough on crime would have on our society. Politicians love using those words. They love saying we need to put more police on the streets, when that in fact is not the solution to criminal problems. Problems of crime are multifaceted, deep, problems that have a lot of various causes. And it's much more prudent, but it's less sexy for us to invest in things like communities, like increased housing, like social services that prevent people from falling into crime in the first place. So I would advocate for people to learn more about how our system works, because education is power. For so long, we've been indoctrinated by this crime and punishment mentality that gives us this false belief that punishing somebody will change their behavior in some way. And we are driven by a sense of vengeance when we adopt that mentality, when really what social science says, and what, if we think deep down inside about how we would react, we should be driven by compassion. We should be driven by trying to find a solution to the underlying problems that cause people to undertake criminal activities to begin with. And then also there's the aspect of, well, there's so many things in society that we criminalize that shouldn't be criminalized. They're not actual criminal problems. So drugs, for example, not just cannabis, but drugs more broadly, the consumption of drugs and the regulation of drugs, that shouldn't be left up to the criminal courts. It is not an issue that is appropriately dealt with. But you could look at the opiate crisis, for example. That is not an issue that is appropriately dealt with by the police, by our courts. They're ill-equipped to deal with it, and people are dying as a result. I think absolutely it is. I think it was a turning point where society, especially in the aftermath of cannabis legalization, realized, okay, we can do something like this and our society's not going to fall apart, right? And for a lot of people, I think that gave them comfort. And now we see even organizations like the Canadian Chiefs of Police are coming out advocating for the decriminalization of all illicit drugs. And when you have an organization that historically is more towards the enforcement and decriminalization of certain activities than they are against, and you have them come out and say that, I mean, it was an opportunity for the government to really sit back and say, well, what are we doing here by continuing to criminalize it when the police are telling us not to do it, right? So I think that it was a turning point, and we're going to see a sea change in our approach to criminalizing, particularly illicit substance use. So we're only the second country in the world to legalize cannabis in this way, and I think that it is a testament to our progressive mindset when it comes to social issues. We were among the first countries in the world to decriminalize same-sex marriage, and we've always been sort of on the forefront of of social issues when it comes to things that impact people's lives on a daily basis. Same with abortion rights, things like that. I think we have a long and proud history of being a country that does things like that, and I think that we should continue with that legacy. So I think that this is just another step in what it represents, what it means to be Canadian in my mind. It is to follow the evidence and to pass laws that represent the best of what we can do as a society.